Hello, everybody. Welcome to the May 2026 Feeling of Computing virtual meetup. We've got three presentations today. Jasmine Otto is going to demo an update on multiplayer Bitsy, which is something we've seen at previous virtual meetups. Ivan Lugo has a web-based IDE experiment that we're going to see. And then finally, Luke Stanley has some 2D visual zoomable UI. It sounds like my kind of stuff. So hopefully you'll all enjoy it as well. So Jasmine, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying Bitsy is an in-browser game development environment. I have a fork of this that uses auto merge to sync together an arbitrary number of sessions. The server is running uh, in that room, um, and it all goes through auto merge. I just fixed a interesting graphics unloading situation. Uh, I will show you what a Bitsy game looks like, and I'm going to start with so last time we started from a blank canvas. This time we'll start from a teaching exercise by Anna Anthropy, who teaches narrative design in Bitsy. So we'll go in there and basically see that a whole palette of characters is available to us. I am going to fiddle with my Zoom setup so that in a moment I can share this link with everyone and we'll see what happens. I'll orient you in the tools here briefly. You can put things in a room. You can change the way that guys are drawn. Hell yeah. Uh, and yep, that's getting unloaded by the cache. Uh, Interesting. Uh, what I would like to do now is you can see I have another instance up, and we're sharing cursors, which is a new thing using transients. I'm going to put in this link, uh, and if you want to jump into this instance, please do so. Great, we now have a party. I can see many cursors in this world. You all have your own set of tools. So if you fiddle with these from the tools bar, you'll be able to see what stuff is there. You'll be able to move guys around the screen. If you switch to the tile in the paint, then you'll be able, someone has changed the palette. Very good. You should be able to change the map. And now we basically have a painting program that we're in together. I'm noticing that I'm getting stairs instead of a block when I click here. Let me try flicking in and out of this room to see if those, oh my, um, those are in fact blocks and I just have a pointer that's misbehaving. But the game data is perfectly fine. If you ever want to find the game data, it lives in this Games tab under Data, and it's a single plain text file.
This is holding up remarkably well considering how many chaos monkeys you've just thrown into it.
Oh, yes.
This is super cool.
This is so much fun just to watch it all happen. Yeah.
So the reason this was inspired, of course, by Ink and Switch's multiplayer Godot project. And I started work on this, I would say, 18 months ago, figuring, oh, Bitsy is very tiny. So with the resources of one person, I'm sure I can use the same uh, mature, basically mature auto merge library. Uh, Let me go over to dialogue. That's just the title, but I'm wondering if we have. Ah, I see that I am getting flickered on the dialogue menu. Uh, and I can do that. So rather than demo, I wonder
Can I
if I can
ask a
demo it from
question,
here.
Jasmine?
Please.
So you mentioned that the dialogue is flickering. I noticed you tried to change it to the cat dialogue and it kept flipping back to the title. Is that the
Yeah.
sort of thing that, as you're working on this project, that's the kind of stuff that you're continuing to figure out? Is like, where is there maybe, state that's being shared or not being shared, and you need to kind of make different decisions about that? Or
Yes.
where's
In
the
a
effort going
perfect
into this project at the moment?
yes. So in a perfect world, um, this is this is a model view controller framework. But no, but Bitsy is actually a 15-year-old, it's a 15 year, it's 10 years old. Uh, so it existed before this is a vanilla JavaScript windowing framework that Adam Ledoux put together. Um, so I'm teaching myself where does what is the update propagation. Uh, the thing I just hot fixed 2 minutes before this call was all of these characters were unloading because it turns out I've done demos and everything. I was there's a fake memory limit where there's 512 blocks, and every time any edit went through, it was allocating new blocks instead of overriding the old ones. Uh, so you can still see that artifact where I it looks like the animation cycle is grabbing two different sprites instead of two states of the same sprite. Uh, there
Was that an issue from the last time you presented? I remember um,
it was less
this.
salient.
Hmm.
There are some layers of basically, oh, who is this guy? Who is this little guy? This is T. Uh, can't connect to the WebSocket anymore. Oh no. Is so my interest here is basically how many layers of state issues are there? Is that Sandy, are you able to reload in? Because I would definitely be curious what the issue is. Uh, hopefully this isn't just a Vercel. Uh, thank you. Now I am curious. So that's in my local tab. I wonder if my online tab is,
I love that you
huh.
said how many different layers of state issues are there? Like it's not just the
Well,
number of state issues. It's like we have layers and layers of state issues. That's very charming.
yeah, we have destroyed the ngrok server, so thank you all for helping me do that. That's the first time I have done that organically. Uh, so now I will talk about what I've been doing to collect feedback uh, outside of we do have an issue tracker on GitHub. Uh, most of I as far as I'm aware, all of these issues have been reported by students of my collaborator who teaches an intro games class uh, using this tool. Uh, excellent. So I have renamed all of these issues. I just talked through the room renderer. There's a more complex data issue with the exits and endings because I'll just show you the UX for that. Uh, there's just basically because you can change the state of the exit, this is not a view operation. This is changing the semantics of that link between rooms. So that's actually really difficult to communicate. So I've inherited a UX issue that becomes doubly confusing when many people are performing operations. Uh, the generic thumbnails, that's inconsequential. Some loading the game clears data. Uh, so I think the interesting stuff going forward will we have some corner case where it was possible to get into a corner of the state where the editor is now allergic, so I have to build in a recovery path. Uh, don't know why yet.
Sorry, allergic? Allergic to being used?
Yeah, this URL is corrupted. They're not kidding.
Hmm.
Actually, we're slamming into the network error here. If I do this from the local instance, I'm going to paste that, copy that, paste that here. And instead of the network error, it started allocating. No, the new cores issue is actually, oh, wait, 8080, 8080. Uh, I'm not able to reproduce that issue at this very moment. But basically a lot more people are building things on this now. Um, so what I was going to say is where I want to go with this, um, is let me let me just go to itch.io and search for Bitsy, because there are 10,000 Bitsy games here, and you can have the source code from any one of them. Uh, right, it's embedded into the HTML. I would love to add a script that adds a button that opens this in multiplayer Bitsy. That just gives you a fork. Uh, it's the fork and edit model. Observable HQ uses that. Because you can, and Tabletop Simulator uses that. You can take any asset from any Bitsy game and drop it into your Bitsy game. So that's kind of my blue sky on, can we, there doesn't need to be an app store. There's already a commons of all of the stuff in the universe. Uh, what we don't, what I don't know is, does that, ideally, I'm building that on top of the social sharing features in itch, right? Because I can click to any game. There's this one that is literally 8 years old. Uh, so, and you can use your itch profile to share things and make collections and everything. Everything has been implemented except for that golden UX path to, with one click, just pop over, get this set of, let me just go to the find tool, get this inventory of assets so that you can find what you need.
So, Jasmine, we're just about out of time. I thought I'd ask, um, what's next for multiplayer Bitsy? What things are you thinking about doing? Is it getting more users? Is it fixing bugs and adding features? Where's your energy going to go?
It's so I'll basically, I without this the next thing is that I'm going to present this at Narrowscope. I'm going to run a game jam there with narrative designers, like for games folk. But what I want to thank you all for helping me catch more bugs. I very much appreciate that. Uh, I've just described a world where, in addition to, you can use this in the class setting where the instructor is handing you the assets you need. There's a plausible path to finding the assets you need and pulling from the commons that builds on the existing ish community that would lead to me hosting a remix oriented jam. Uh, And I'm glad Paolo Perricini's mentioned here that I've been teaching games for many years. Uh, I don't know what, yeah, I want to keep doing synchronous events. I don't think this becomes, uh, sustainable thing for me unless I suddenly get a lot of people who want to do a Patreon. If there is no Patreon, then no, there's no path to support. I'm the only person who's squishing bugs here, if that's
Yeah, that answers that question. Jasmine, thank you so much. It's delightful to see a project that was um, promising but barely working last time you showed it, or at least fell over when all of the Chaos Monkeys jumped into something where we could actually click around and use it, and it was like it held up to that, and it feels like I could imagine this being very fun for jams. So I wish you great success.
yeah.
All right, next up, Ivan, do you want to show us your IDE?
Oh, yes. Hello, folks. So, quick word of warning. I'm going to be talking very quickly. So, if I'm talking too quickly, just slow me down. I'm very excited today because things are kind of working. I wasn't expecting them to. So, I'll start off with making sure that I can actually share the screen so you guys can see what you folks can see what I'm working on. And if this works, all right, cool, it's working. So, I'm going to start off with what this is, right? The whole thesis, the whole point is rendering a code base all at once. It's kind of all about rendering text, rendering glyphs in space, but really the idea is seeing it all in one place. I'm not going to go into the history of it. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a master at it. I'm absolutely not. There has been decades of research and studies, people that are way smarter than me, way better at kind of ideating and building the stuff out. And I've done what I can to kind of put this together if you're interested in seeing the history from a place of like just rendering text or having code and graphs and layouts in kind of different metaphorical patterns, so like cities and spaced kind of graph node things. I mean, there's a whole bunch of terms to kind of throw at you here. But the idea is that I think in 3D space, I think most humans do. I like to be able to look around and grab things and touch things and understand things on a spatial relationship that, hey, this thing over here is related to this thing over here because they're spatially related. And I like to be able to kind of poke at it and introspect it, right? And kind of in the world where we live right now, your IDE kind of looks something like this. You know, you have some files on the left-hand side, or maybe some bars over here, a little mini map, and you see your text and your code. But you kind of have these ideas of tabs, and you have to kind of jump around and do things from tab to tab, and you kind of have to have your own mental model of where things are and how they look. Well, I didn't like that. So I spent, well, it's not so much I didn't like it. I love writing software. I just needed something else. I needed to be able to dig into this in another meteor way. So over the years, and I really do mean years, I've tried to iterate in this idea of what it means to write software in 3D. And I brought up this prior art and all these different ideas about like what people had tried because there's all sorts of things. I went with this idea of I just want to see it. I don't have the mental capacity and the motivation and the ability to like think in different metaphors in this way. I have to learn it. It's hard for people to do sometimes. So I just wanted the text. So way this works right now is you're actually looking at the IDE looking at itself. And if you'd like, you can actually go to the website. It's hosted for free. It's open source. You can go to the IDE right now and play with it. And this is a public repository with the code, so I'm looking at it. But the cool part is that it's not just a little, bit of text here. I can actually pull back and I can see this file related to its directories, and I can pull all the way out, and I can keep pulling all the way out, keep pulling all the way out, and I can see the entirety of the repository rendered character by character, glyph by glyph for everything. And it loads up pretty quickly and efficiently. So I can jump over here, example of this little tab, and see my logger file, and I can move this around, and I can jump back a little bit further, and I can look at these guys over here. And I have this kind of IDE set up sort of where I'm able to jump around and look at files and see how things are rendered. And there's two important things here. One is that this is not this isn't like a texture or like a snapshot of text. This is actually rendering a character like a terminal. So each individual glyph is addressable. I can move it, I can put it in 3D space, I can manipulate it, I can color it, I can scale it wherever you want, right? So it's legitimately a three-dimensional terminal just kind of in space. It's also very ugly right now. You see there's a lot of green, a lot of kind of weird coloring. It's because I've thrown a million different ideas at this and I've tried a million different ways to do this. In fact, I even went to the Apple side, and this was my first iteration of this, where I had different versions that worked for iOS and iPad and stuff. And it kind of did its own thing, but I've reinvented the wheels, and you can kind of look at that too. It's all open source. But that's just the core. This is the idea. It's an engine that allows you to render glyphs of any kind in 3D space. And then this is a wrapper around it showing you, hey, this is how you could write an IDE around it. But there's a lot of things you can do. For example, you can, the performance of this, I mean, I'm at 180 frames a second with 2.5 million glyphs. That's pretty darn good. So think about like a language visualization, right? Or a dictionary or a Scrabble game, right? You can have as many of these things you want in space. It's basically a particle system just from my brain, and that's it, right? That's all that kind of is. So this is like the first version of it, and it's kind of flat. I mean, I went and told you that this whole thing is in 3D, so where's the cool 3D stuff, right? Well, that's this version over here. This is like the third iteration that I'm trying to clean up. So this is kind of what I put together the last couple days. That sort of gets you closer to what I'm envisioning, right? So this is kind of like a tree-like look of the same code we saw before. So if I'm looking at this, you can see that, this is the top level directory and its files, and you can see these lines and directions saying that these directories are related, and I can do the same thing. I can jump from one to the other. They're all interactable, and that's kind of the idea. So you're seeing the engine, you're seeing different ways it can kind of morph and take shape, and you're kind of seeing how I like to think about things in space. And I know I'm missing a bunch of comments because I'm talking really fast enough, but that's kind of the big demo. It's a whole lot of rendering, it's a whole lot of code, and there's one special little thing that kind of makes this really powerful. I fundamentally believe also that there's a tooling mismatch with IDEs, right? It's either me versus the IDE, and then kind of the computer versus the IDE, and we don't work well together. So what I'm trying to do is I'll try to zoom in, sorry, it's a little small here, is allow for this system where it's kind of like an RPC setup for the IDE. So I can ask, for example, my LLM agents and helpers or co-friends or whatever to actually interact with the IDE directly. So it can do things like generate tours through the code. It can highlight code. It can move it around. It can change layouts. It can change modes. It can change the scene. Everything that I can do as a button is available as a command. And it's a command that I can use by the CLI or a WebSocket connection or eventually from remote sessions as well. So it's meant to be the best, easiest way to have everything shown all at once, all together, with as many commands as you want, because that's how I like. I like to be able to poke at every direction and thing. So, talked a lot. I don't know how long I've talked. I forgot to look at the time. But
You're actually
that's
doing great for time.
oh
You're
good.
doing really good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I may have said all the things already, without kind of demoing more of the other stuff. But in terms of feature wise, it's also editable. So I can click one of these guys and I can type and I can actually edit the files too. That was an interesting, relearning of some of the performance characteristics of the web browser versus like native applications. So lots of workers and, single threaded concurrency kind of stuff. But that's the whole idea. I have some crazy ideas that I want to work with this further. For example, I have this cool hand tracking system where if you have anything with like a LiDAR, like an iPhone, right? Or you have a webcam, right? You turn this on. I think I broke it right now, but you turn it on with my little iOS app, you can actually see your hand in 3D space. And I like that because I actually want to reach into it, grab it, and move a file somewhere else, right? Get my hands off the mouse and get it on the actual stuff. Let me stack things together. I have other things that didn't really go so well, like grouping. There was no reason to do that. It can kind of collapse into a bunch of commands. And like I said, it's for any arbitrary code and file. The other really cool thing is that I mentioned it's kind of CLI based. So there's kind of this Go server at the end that you can download. I think I only have it compiled right now for Linux because that's what I'm using right now. But the idea is you can connect the browser to your WebSocket connection and have the two talk to each other. And that's how you're going to do things like have your agent interact with your session directly. So you can download it, you can play with it. It is a little buggy, it's a little non-performant, but I mean, most of that's just kind of loading in files in the network. I can't really do much about that. And that's it. I think I'm gonna stop
Awesome.
now. So that's
I'm
it.
gonna I'm gonna read a question from the chat, and then depending
Yes,
on
yes.
how that answer goes, I might ask my own follow-up question. So in the chat, Sandy asked, question, it seems like you are currently displaying text buffers. Have you experimented with showing smaller units of text instead, maybe at the function level, and then using the spatial dimension to show the call graph or something?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, so many times, yes. That is one of the biggest drivers. In my old version of this, I had kind of a half-baked semantic lookup system. So that idea was whether I was loading JavaScript or Swift or whatever I was coding in, I wanted to be able to say, what's a function, what's a class, what's a structure, and then have that navigate through. And I want to be able to collapse and expand things, which I haven't quite gotten to. But that walkthrough, that idea of knowing how something was built at that semantic token level, at that function level is super important. And that's the idea of where the tour gets to, where I can ask the agent, hey, please generate this tour for me, or a coworker or some other human to say, hey, how does this work? So I can highlight individual functions and codes and draw lines one to the other and look at a whole call stack. The coolest feature, which I should have gotten ready, which I didn't think about now, was that trace approach. So one thing I used to do when I was coding the iOS side or the Apple platform side was I would record the logs in the application and then play them back. And so the logs would actually highlight and load the files and show you, hey, this is running, this is running, this is running, and see kind of threads going. So the idea that we're on that same page, yes, I want it. I want you to help. I'd love you to take a look at that too, because that's exactly what I want. I want that ability to look at that whole semantic setup for code.
Cool. That did not answer my follow-up question, so I'll ask it, which is that as you've been exploring spatializing the code and playing with the interface around which we interact with textual code, there's that word text, have you thought about moving away from text at all? And if so, in what ways?
Yes. So the biggest thing I did between the original application and this is really dig into what people have done before. And it's all about visual metaphors. Some people like thinking in blocks that represent an idea. Some people like thinking in symbols that do something, right? Um, I don't know yet what that marriage is for my own brain. I think there's something to, I think, this idea where once you pull back, you can't see glyphs anymore. You can't see text. And so you want something that you can kind of represent it. And I think there's probably something you can do where once you begin to kind of isolate an entity and you flow into it and you get closer, things can kind of dynamically change from like an object to the raw text. And again, there's lots of prior art there. I just haven't gotten to it. I think the closest one is like a node and wire setup where it's like here's a thing, you wire it up and you kind of see things flowing. And I've got experiments with that, but that's a whole nother bag of tricks. So yes, and I haven't gotten to it yet.
Anybody else questions?
I've got a follow-up question, which is how much is the 3D-ness baked into this as opposed to 4D or and dimensional things? If I wanted to like visualize code among more dimensions, can I project that down to 3D and then down to 2D in screen space?
Wow, I have not considered that question at all. So in terms of the I'll see if I can answer this. In terms of the visualization layer, it's built on Three.js, so it's inherently like XYZ, Cartesian coordinate kind of stuff, right? But the way it's built, if you want to project it through 1 through 3, sure, just lay something out in one set of coordinates or another, right? That should be okay. In terms of higher dimensionality, I don't really know. I myself am probably grog. I don't really think in higher dimensions, and I don't have a lot of experience in terms of the data-oriented side of that, and I have to admit that wholeheartedly. But hopefully, the primitives that the engine allows for, which is just put a glyph in space, allows you to wrap whatever you want around it. So if you're doing something like n-dimensionality of, let's say, semantic vectors, right? You have these thousands of different words that you're trying to place around. The experiment that I tried to run with that is I took an LLM, I had it run through a dictionary and write it a bunch of definitions, and then write those definitions with semantic similarity cosines, and then put them in space, right? And so that gave me like this interesting word cloud of things. I still had to map it down, so it was still 3D, but the point was I took words, put it in space. So whatever the engine doesn't do for you or isn't able to do at the moment, let me know because I'm certain there's some mapping from what you're trying to do to what I'd like to be able to do as well, if that makes sense.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more question if anybody has one. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering if in using this, you've noticed some sort of like depending on the code base, some natural hierarchies form out of it, or if you're always arranging things manually depending on what you're doing. Like, is there some sort of if your code base, for instance, has like a heavy core that does all the logic and then an interface at the periphery, does it arrange itself hierarchically in a natural feeling way, or is it always sort of just arranging things depending on how you're feeling at the moment?
Uh, it's a fantastic question. because layout is the hardest thing I've had to solve. However, at the moment, it assumes that the directory structure of your files, of your code, is the way you'd want them to be laid out, as the first assumption. The next one is that it assumes a sort of natural ordering. So for example, you mentioned this kind of core idea and like what maybe different areas of the code base are doing. I've tried to model some of that in this version, right? Where you kind of see different boxes around certain directories. And if I scoot past it and I can look at that depth on this side, you can see that, okay, well, here's this root application directory. And then I have all these child directories here that have different responsibilities and their relationships. So the depth kind of shows you relatability in terms of what is happening at that nested depth. For example, the further you are down in an arbitrary graph or an arbitrary tree, the more likely it is to be specialized, right? Into some kind of functionality. So that's what this is trying to show. And what's really cool, like if you pick any arbitrary repo, like if I go, sometimes this works, if I go to Torvald Linux and I load this and I go master, it's going to take about, I don't know, maybe a minute to render here, right? It's going to take about 5,000 or so files. You can see the entirety of Linux rendered here. And you can see, oh yeah, a quarter of this are like fixtures and tests and they're tiny little files, and you just ignore those, right? Or you can go all the way to the right and see these massive kernel, drivers that I have no idea what's going on. But that's the idea, is like the structure of your code is already there. You already have directories and names and highlights and maybe symlinks or whatever, right? And so I wanted to map that, because the next level is letting your brain wrap around the mental model of what your structure are. So let your eyes and your ears and your whatever senses kind of work that. Is that answered, or is that a little too vague? Excellent. Okay, cool. Thank you very much all for your time. This is awesome.
Yeah, Ivan, thank you for presenting. That was super, super cool. Luke, whenever you're ready, you're up.
Hello. Cool.
Hello.
So I'm interested in the problem of how we as human beings can try and get a good mental model of what is going on, to try and understand things and to make use of our high bandwidth visual centers that are really good at interpreting information efficiently. I'm interested in things like how you can have things like embeddings and generated categories and different kinds of relationships and graph structures and so on, in order to make useful visualizations that don't look like a mess. Speaking of which, this looks like a mess. And this is what you get when you have a data set of topics that are being projected down from high dimensional space into 2D space. You should expect it to be a mess. You should expect there to be overlap. But by default, there isn't a clean reduction down to two-dimensional space. So this shouldn't be surprising, but it is really annoying. And the reason why it happens is because it's a point. Mathematically, it's just a point. It doesn't have any dimension to the two-dimensional representation, or any two-dimensional representation, unless you make it so. And when you do that, you need to figure out what you're going to do with things like overlap. And one of the things people do is they might have like a force effect where they'll just see that you've got a node next to another node and they're too close, so that you're just going to make them push themselves apart. But then you start having to tweak all kinds of really fiddly, annoying variables to try and keep the semantic integrity, if you will, anything authentic. And it's also a bit of a kludge to switch to a different kind of algorithm just at the presentation time, without any consideration of the semantic the embeddings themselves. So I've settled on an approach where the process happens in multiple stages, but those stages are aware of the semantic relations between the nodes, and that they can use that in order to find a good non-overlapping position for the nodes, so that you could end up with something a bit like that. This is still, it's not got overlap. That's good. And if you, I don't know if anybody knows these topics. These are from Samuel Pepys's his life, and the things in it that I've just taken out of a manually made list. And this is a lot better. And the semantic integrity is actually quite good. So, for example, it's got stuff like the people that he's. What do I do? It's got things like a gallbladder surgery thing he had is a personal concern of his, and he had a stone that came out, and he had like frequent pains and so on whenever he got cold and things like that. It was just one of his sort of anxious preoccupations. And another one is gold. He came by some gold as the main currency, I suppose. And yeah, and these kind of fit into a psychological kind of cluster for him. Likewise, as his sort of main occupational duties are sort of in a place, and there's sort of like the Navy sort of cluster there, and the Great Fire of London, and there's sort of a more sort of empty area here, which is fitting. Anyhow, yeah. So the semantic integrity is good, but it's still not very intuitive. Obviously, these days we've got image generators and stuff. So I had this semi-manually, semi-automatically generated for those icons, which probably helps a little bit. And of course, what would probably be more useful would be a zoomable user interface where you can go and look at different things and at different levels see different zooms, very much like what was being talked about earlier by Ivan. I've not done much with that yet. There's a lot that could be done, but I do have some large language model generated salience scores given to some of the topics that I've used to adjust the scale and the opacity of some of them. So, for instance, there's a woman who was loosely related in some gossip with some people in this area, and she's not as central. Her centrality is low to Pepe's life, but she's an interesting figure. But she's not full opacity, so she's not worth foregrounding at sort of the deathbed perspective of his life, for example. So when I'm zoomed out here, what it's showing are things that are high rank and high salience, or some combination. And when I zoom in, it shows me more of them without them being faded out. And yeah, and that's basically as far as I've got with that. Now,
May I ask a question at this point? I'm gonna do the thing and jump in and ask a question in the middle. That's the format. So I have this weird, I'll call it a personal belief, which is that any interface that is presenting some information or presenting a visualization of something is also potentially a good interface through which you can express something. So it's, there's the two sides to every interface. And this interface so far, you've talked about what it's revealing, what it's showing, how it relates to higher dimensional spaces, that sort of thing. And I'm curious what you've thought about with respect to doing expressive work through this interface.
Yeah. So you can actually project back. There's a popular library called UMap Learn that actually lets you do that. So UMap is a common solution for being able to do dimensionality reduction of high dimensional data. It doesn't have a global objective. It's mostly local, which means that it might mess up how things fit together in aggregate, which is not ideal. But one of the cool things it does do is it's got a way of being able to project back. So it can let you predict what highly dimensional representation, what highly dimensional embedding would make sense for. Let's say I put something new here. What might it mean based upon everything else it knows about the space? How might it be related to these sort of personal things and these sort of social things and these sort of like work things? And yeah, that absolutely can be done. And also, it's sometimes just useful just to do, drag and drop sort of image collage sort of stuff as well. And people often prefer paper for this kind of reason. It's just a real pain to have to not be able to arrange stuff when you're operating digitally. So yes, I think so. That would be powerful. And also, might be worth saying, another problem that's common is you get the orientation flip around whenever you regenerate one of these kinds of things, because there's different ways of doing dimensionality reduction, and they're often based on some kind of random seed that you have, or other random chaotic things that make them stochastic and not able to stay in the same sort of orientation. But I actually perform a rotation that anchors just 2 points, so that when I regenerate, the entire map kind of coheres, which is really nice, especially for being able to add points or remove them. Yeah, that's probably about it.
We've got time for maybe 2 more questions. If anybody in the audience has something they'd like to ask, just unmute and go right ahead.
I do have one question. I really like the stuff that you mentioned about reverse projecting into high dimensional spaces. I was wondering, because on the UI, mathematicians like to reduce simple to spherical curves. So when modeling stuff on 2D, we have everything modeled as points. But when we actually have a 2D space, things also have dimensions, they have shapes. And we're also thinking categories. So, often many of those things, even on the screen, on user interface, they could be kind of grouped together by putting them in a box or surrounding them with a line. This is how many, mind maps are actually presented. So are there any ways of quantifying size of those embeddings on screen, so that they are not just points, so that you could assign a region of space to them, which is not point-like?
Yeah, it definitely could be done. I've not done that yet, so I've not got it where it says this belongs to a work cluster. I don't have that kind of membership stuff at the moment, but it's doable.
Just as looking at the 2D, I guess something like Voronoi map would be that's the easiest approach on screen. But there is this underlying structure in the projection, where different sections of the embedding space, they occupy different parts of the screen.
Yeah, and actually there's, in terms of what people are doing with pre-trained models and embedding spaces, that they're finding out some really cool things recently. like particular geometric patterns being shared among completely different models. We're starting to be able to peer into that geometric representation space that they've been learning in high dimension. And yeah, people are interested in that from a machine learning and interpretability and safety perspective as well.
Thanks.
Got time for one more question.
So I have a quick one too. That last point from you two about the high dimensionality and language thing. There was an article that I saw on Y Combinator somewhere. Well, it was an archive paper, but it was talking about that very thing where it was saying, hey, scientists or some researchers have found that across n number of languages, right, there was a very definite pattern to certain words and word groups and semantics, right? And one of the things that your tool or this project is showing is like, well, this is kind of like a version of a certain language, right? So I'm looking at dining and great fire and price goods, and there's a certain kind of visual theme to it and a linguistic theme. But what I'm curious about is, you clearly have operated on this from different texts and different spaces. So have you seen a pattern in the way that you've like built this out? Have you seen linguistic patterns, and have you tried to kind of visualize that little bit, saying, well, in this case, dining means this, but in this case, for the other person, dining means that? And have you been able to kind of express that at all?
One thing I was looking into is if I could use a just off-the-shelf mini LM embeddings to be able to do salience prediction, just by extracting a few of the dimensions and maybe doing some multiplication on them together. And that worked pretty well. So like I'd have a data set of different kinds of life events, different kinds of scales. And then you can zoom in on ways to slice the normal embeddings you get for a piece of text to try and predict something like salience in a really efficient way. And then the manifold steering paper came out, which basically showed stuff like different dates mapping to a particular shape inside large language models. And so they look at things like weekdays in different language models corresponding to certain shapes. So my naive way of just finding a few columns that have useful parameters, I put that aside to try and get my head around the whole higher dimensional geometry that they're actually using, because it seems more fundamental. If that answers your question.
It does exactly, and that paper is perfect, right?
Yeah.
Words and words, I think we're finding have a definitive shape. Like whether I'm speaking Italian, German, French, English, or some weird mixture of it, if I say the word good or bad or evil or positive, whatever, that's going to have some kind of shape. And so when I'm talking to you and I can see that shape, well, that's another dimension that we can kind of communicate across. So the fact that you're there, like, this is very much why I'm trying to build my whole system, is because what you're describing is I needed a visual medium for it. So this is really, really cool to see, like, oh, look, how it works on the other side is the data part of it. So thank you. Very cool.
Yeah. I also, I love to point to Robert Horn, who kind of coined the term visual language, or at least popularized it. He wrote a book about it. He's a wise elder gentleman who lives somewhere in San Francisco right now. And I don't know how active he is at the moment, but he's, at least maybe a decade ago, he published some really cool PDFs to archive.org after they already had scanned his visual language book. He's basically got a very clear walkthrough of how does this even make any sense between us? Like, how can somebody have an inkling of what this is about by looking at it without actually knowing about Pepys and his life. How? I mean, there are a whole load of sort of language components that he talks about and explains, and why it's important to have text, why it's important to have visuals, and how they fit together, what level of abstraction works, and his book is probably from like maybe the 80s or 90s. I don't know how well known it is, but it's it's out there on archive.org, and he's posted it as himself. I encourage people who are wondering about the grammar of visual language to check that out, because he's thought about this stuff a lot, and people have been using this kind of thing actively for things like studying pandemics. How do you deal with communicating with hundreds of different people with different specialisms, with different biorisk areas, and how do you get them to collaborate and share their findings in a useful way? And he would do things like make a mess map, or an info mural, you might call them, things like that. And there's kind of a defined language that has been mapped out to some degree. Not to say that there aren't new forms of language and different ways of doing things all the time that we're discovering, making new mediums and so on. But it's a really useful work to check out.
That's probably a good note to end on. Luke, thank you very much for sharing what seems to be the promising first steps on a project.
Yeah.
So I'll be excited to see this unfold in the coming months. Thanks, Jasmine and Ivan and Luke, for demoing today. Thanks everybody for coming out, and we will see you next time.